Hey. You know, it looks a lot different from up here than from down there, but I think we'll be all right today. We're going to be talking about the enterprise level adoption of JavaScript. A lot of you probably could give a lot of background beyond what I can talk about today. I'm interested to see as we go. We'll talk about kind of the history from 95 when JavaScript's inception all the way through, just really briefly, and I want to get a little bit of feedback and find out how long people have been working with the language technology in general. So as we go, I'm not a big fan of bio slides, but I wanted to bring one up. I've been working with Walt Disney Company for about 5 years. I work in corporate, and so the reason I bring that up is we do actually do a ton of node work, but we work across all the different brands. And so we're building a lot of tooling, a lot of CLI tools, a lot of serverless infrastructure, a lot of different things like that that have to scale to just massive volume. And so one of the things that's been interesting to me is in some time I worked at Amazon before and then at Disney now, just to kind of see the mentality swing about JavaScript as a technology. And that's kind of what I was asked to talk about today. So in a brief 20 minutes. I have a lot I want to cover, so we're going to fly through some of this. But to start with, JavaScript timeline. 1995, we had Netscape Navigator. Yes, anybody coded in Netscape or had to write JavaScript for Netscape? Oh, sweet, more than I thought. I figured I'd have maybe 2 or 3 hands. Well, we did have Netscape. This is when we actually had JavaScript officially introduced. Moco changed names, JavaScript is introduced, things started rolling, we're all happy, we can write things. And then in 97, 98, I know a few people are probably going to cringe when you see IE4 up here, but this is when we had DHTML introduced. Anybody do you remember doing image flips and things like that in dynamic HTML? A few nods? Awesome. So this was not necessarily our favorite thing in hindsight. At the time, it was fantastic. We could do preloaders, we could do all kinds of stuff to help optimize perceived latency of pages, played around with stuff, but it wasn't very valuable beyond just those few little things. Jumping ahead several years, 2005, I think this is where we sort of stepped into a new realm of understanding of some of the limitations because we had things like prototype, YUI starting to be introduced, and we had frameworks for the first time. So we had some attention to needing something more structured. Okay, so this was back 13 years ago. We started seeing some of this roll out. 2006, any guesses? Yeah, Jquery, 2006. How many of you have not ever written Jquery? That's what I thought. Oh, wow, we have about 3. So Jquery is interesting because it's been around 12 years now. Obviously, it's had multiple variations. Anybody who's written plugins for it or anything, I remember even when we split and we have 2 versus 1 just because of the different the browser matrix support and all these different things. But it still today is a prerequisite for some of the other libraries. And so it has a ton of coverage still today. Jumping ahead a little bit, 2007, we started having some of the more, I guess, specific things. EXTJS, configuration-driven, was one of the first times you could build almost like desktop-style apps in the browser more easily. I shouldn't say it's the first time you could do it, but it was more accessible. MooTools was brought up in a few talks today as well. But these are the libraries that started coming around. Then 2009, as you can tell, this is one of my favorite years because this is when we had Node introduced originally. So is there anyone who has been working, I shouldn't say anyone, how many of you have been working with Node since its inception, 2010, I would say? Just a few. I was not. I started around 2012, but this is kind of our background here. 2010, we had Backbone, Angular, MongoDB. Now, MongoDB, I understand, came out before this. This is v1.4. The first production version was 2010. But this is where it gets very, very interesting because now we have the capacity for full stack development in JavaScript from DB all the way through end to end. And then 2011, we still have a lot of attention on the front end with things like Bootstrap that, again, we're building on Jquery for a lot of the behavioral things. And then we have NPM as well. This, again, was the first, this is the 1.0 release of NPM. Still building on, we see both sides of the stack continuing to have development. And then 2013, to me, I like this year as well because it's when we first started seeing offerings that fully supported end-to-end. I mean, packaged up and said, here's your mean stack, here's this, here's that. We also have React, the initial release, official release of React, 2013. 15, any guesses? It's because it's not a framework. This is when we actually had Node.js Foundation that Joyent moved to establish the foundation. So 3 years ago, is the last slide we're going to talk about here. Why? Well, the path to adoption, this is what we've had to wade through. Okay, so the first, you'll notice all the way to 2009, obviously, we're wading through client-side stuff. Changes, needs, just dealing with all these different pieces. And then 2009, 2010, we start having a solution. However, we're talking specifically today about enterprise adoption. Now, anybody who's worked for a sizable company understands even once something's out there, it takes a long, long time to get the ship turned around to where you can actually leverage it internally. So what I want to get at here is it's not that the technology isn't there, it's that there's a mentality shift that had to happen. And so what I did is I reached out to several industry thought leaders in JavaScript and that have been working for a while. These quotes are all from people who started working with JavaScript in the late 1990s. So this is when the language was very new. And these are the perceptions that they felt the enterprise had towards JavaScript when they started. Okay, so stuff like JavaScript was viewed as a horrible thing to work with. It should be avoided if you can help it. JavaScript, I like the one over here, was considered more of a toy language. It was used for cute effects, delivering some additional interactivity to static web pages. This is pretty common. We get this. So I jump ahead and I say, well, what about those people who started working another 10 years later? So now we're looking at 2000 to 2013, these are all people who started working with the language during this time period. It's unstable, not ready for production. It was a joke, a toy language no serious programmer would use. I like this one. You were generally considered a more serious developer if you didn't know JavaScript. Knowing JavaScript enabled you to be a, quote, menu engineer. Ouch. That's not real kind, and this is fairly recent, okay? And then finally, in 2013, 2014, people who have started, I would actually say people I interviewed that have started working with JavaScript 2012 and beyond. We started to see finally a collective mentality swing towards it being a much more serious technology, something we can actually leverage. And here are some things, and these are, again, I'm going to bullet point a few things, but these are all quotes I got as well. Now, you'll notice they're not all positive. Just trying to be, this is feedback I got. It's a highly supported, highly developed platform. It has a strong community, yes. Runs almost anywhere. Some employers are still scared of it. Very true. I guess React is good. That one I did get a very interesting kick out of because I've heard this as well. When you talk to people who don't understand the depth of the technology, well, I guess, and they'll insert framework of choice, but they're like, well, I guess it's all right. It lets us do some good stuff. A large portion of development technology depends daily on JavaScript to get the job done. I like that one. Still gaining popularity. This one is important to me simply because it shows that the perspective is that there is still a positive trend. Even in the enterprise world, as people view it, it's still on the upward climb, which is fantastic. We don't want to lose that momentum. It's strategically important language for web and mobile applications. So, Disney, how do we use it? What do we do? What I have seen, even in my short time there, well, short time being almost 5 years now, even in my time there, there's 4 steps that I've seen kind of a pendulum swing from one extreme to the other in this mentality shift. I've seen the same thing at other companies. I've got friends at multiple different large organizations, and I'm speaking particularly for enterprise organizations that are not making their bread and butter as a technology company. I would expect those companies, generally speaking, to be a little bit more receptive of technology. We're talking media, entertainment, other groups who are a little bit more resistant to change at times. We actually started with a very heated opposition against the language. Now what I mean by this is, I go into a group of engineers who are established, who have a way of doing things, and the response is, no way, I would never use JavaScript for that. Awesome. At least gives you somewhere, you know where you stand, you know the direction to head, there's only one way to go from here. And so you start working with people on this, and finally you kind of overcome that first hurdle and you enter into this phase of sort of a grudging allowance. The grudging allowance is essentially that idea of, I guess React is good from the other slide. I suppose it has its place, but why in the world would I want to use it? That's kind of that second point. At that point, though, there's at least acknowledgement of value, right? Finally, we get into what I like to call collective acceptance. This is when we finally get somebody to go, oh, okay, I see the value. They haven't come full circle to say I'm willing to use it necessarily, but at least it's now becoming accepted internally. Yeah, you can go ahead and do that, do your thing, I get it. And finally, and this is actually, we're sort of on the line right now between the third and fourth points here, and we're getting into the point of actually having an internal community support. And what I mean by that is we're starting to have teams of Java engineers, of a few Python groups, Ruby groups, different groups that are supporting older code bases who are actually coming to us now and saying, can you guys teach us how to use Node for XYZ? It seems like it's the right choice. And so we've actually gotten to the point now where we've built enough support and enough community around it where we have teams seeking out the technology to solve certain problems, or at least seeking guidance on how to better make those decisions. So this pendulum really took quite a while. I shouldn't say pendulum because I really want it to stay on this side. I wanted to go from heated opposition, get into the community support, and keep it there. But it's taken years, literally, to swing over there. So the process was not easy, obviously. Now how can I say we've gotten to the point where we have collective acceptance and we're getting into community support? Well, in our GitHub internally right now, we have over 17,000 users, individual users, who have commits into repositories that have a package.json file defined. So at the very least, as a baseline, we've got a whole lot of people committing to these repositories. Now, I'm not saying they all are Node experts or JavaScript experts, but I am saying we have a lot of involvement. We have over 23,000 individual repos. I did actually figure out how to filter out all the ones, because at first I was super excited. I did the search, I was like, 120,000 repos, this is fantastic. And then I realized that like 4 repos had node module directories committed. And so we had package.json that embedded another package.json that embedded another. I was like, oh man. But even that, once I trimmed all that out, we still have over 23,000 individual repos. Now I will tell you this is only the repos I have access to. I don't have access to ESPN, I don't have access to ABC, not directly. This is just within our corporate set that I have access to go search. Okay, so broadly across the company, I know there's more usage. All right, where are we at? I gotta move. This is one I just want to talk to briefly. These are actually a couple of the areas that I personally believe have been really pivotal to getting more enterprise adoption. As I mentioned before, in the enterprise world, you're not going to get adoption of anything, any change, unless you can show some type of tangible value. Makes sense. There's not a whole lot of risk willing to be taken, often, at least not for major changes like moving entire stacks onto new technologies or onboarding a brand new technology to write things that haven't been vetted entirely yet in the mindset of the company. These are two of the ways we've been able to show tremendous value very quickly to the company. The 0 to 60 time to develop a Node application and deploy it to the cloud, you can't argue with that. And the ability we have to build very, very, very rapidly and get it all the way out into production in scalable ways is I believe, one of the biggest things. The automation side, we build command line interfaces. Anybody use Commander node package? Yeah, I like Commander a lot because you can very quickly build command line options with additional sub commands and all these other things, and it's very easy to write this stuff and then integrate it with your backend services. And we actually write those and then put them into our Jenkins jobs. And so we're actually automating all kinds of stuff all across the board using Node. And so the speed and the automation are two of the things with cloud migration that have been tremendously beneficial to getting us on the track to better adoption. Okay, cool, but what are the things you're actually building? I know that's what a lot of people, when I talk to them, like, oh, you work at Disney? Yeah. What are you building? Well, I can talk about a few. The first thing, I've got a little Raspberry Pi up here. It's got a passive infrared sensor on the top. We did a fun little project that allows us to run JavaScript, run Node on the devices using GPIO. We actively track motion in the room, and we push up via WebSocket, and we get it onto your phone with the WebSocket on your website that you can open up. And it basically, just using CSS animation, we toggle rooms between green and red based on whether or not there's currently activity in the room. Very simple concept. What's really cool to me about it is everything from the WebSocket layer to the Pi to the website, end to end, the entire thing's in JavaScript. Yeah, those are fun. So that's one. Another one is we've recently built, and this is a little bit nebulous. I'm happy to talk in more depth if you want to find me later today. But basically what this is a render layer we have behind a CDN that will allow us to host a scalable render layer for multiple multiple DNSs that might share the same basic template structure. Okay, so in this case, we actually have individual Docker containers that are running Node that will essentially, when they try and render the template, will juggle individual component rendering and things like that, be able to do some fun caching, and then respond through the Nginx layer with the payload. So I got to jump through this. And finally, one of the other things I want to touch on is serverless integrations. In this case, we have a digital asset manager, third party, that needs to be able to drop assets into our internal network, which immediately security is like, nope, they cannot reach in. Do not open up any APIs for them to reach into the network and do so. So we run out to AWS, and within 3 weeks, we're able to get into production an entire stack that allows them serverlessly to drop them into S3 after a validation step and everything else, and then let our systems reach out to that SQS and the S3 bucket and actually bring the assets in-house. So again, the only code written in all three of these is JavaScript, which is pretty cool. Because three entirely different use cases that we're able to do in JavaScript. So what's next? Oh, great, we've got JavaScript, we've got enterprise adoption, it's coming along just great. But the key to me is we've all got something we can do to help even further with enterprise adoption. We're all learning, we're all building. I think and I'm looking at myself here, I think what the enterprise lacks often is the sharing aspect. It takes a while to get to the point where I'm able to get permission or pick the company that's willing to come out and say, this is what we're doing. Nothing speaks to value more than usage to a lot of companies. The more you see other people jumping on board and using it for good things, like these render engines, like stuff like that, the more broadly accepted things tend to become. You're building really cool stuff. A friend of mine, David Neal, some of you may have heard him speak before. This is one of my favorite slides. He says, you don't need permission to be awesome. You're already building really cool stuff. My challenge to you is go share it. Let people know what you're building. If I know things that are being done and I can share things we're doing, I can take those back and get even more leverage. Leverage is probably the wrong word. More support to be able to do more with JavaScript. And that's my goal, is I'd like to do more and more and more because I do see the value in it. So I just wanted to say, don't need permission to be awesome, so go be awesome. Thank you. That's all I got.